Snow had been falling since late afternoon, the kind that softens the city and makes everything feel a little more fragile. By the time Christmas Eve settled in, the streets glowed with quiet lights and unspoken hopes. The restaurant stood at the corner of an old square, warm light spilling through its windows like an invitation meant for someone braver than she felt at that moment. Inside, the Vampire King sat alone at a small table near the window. No crown, no guards, no signs of what he truly was. To the staff, he looked like a tall, composed man in a dark coat, his posture calm but alert, as if he had learned long ago how to take up little space while still noticing everything. His hands rested loosely around a cup of untouched tea. It had already gone cold. He had arrived early, he always did. Not because he was eager for romance, but because waiting had become a quiet habit of his. Centuries teach patience in ways no clock ever could. Still, tonight felt different. The air carried something heavier than time. It carried expectation. The waitress passed by for the third time, pretending not to look at him with concern. Outside, couples hurried in together, shaking snow from their coats, laughing softly. Each time the door opened, the bell rang, and for just a moment the Vampire King lifted his eyes. Then lowered them again. He had agreed to this blind date as a courtesy. A favor, really. Someone had insisted she was kind, that she had been through too much, that she deserved a night where someone waited for her without impatience or judgment. Well, he didn't expect much, he never did anymore. What he didn't expect was how deeply he felt the absence across the empty chair. Minutes slipped by, then more. He could sense things others could not, the city's pulse, the quiet fears moving through the snow. Somewhere out there, someone was rushing, apologizing in her heart, telling herself she had already failed before even arriving. He knew that feeling well. At another end of the city, a single mother tightened her scarf as she stepped off a crowded bus, her breath visible in the cold. Her coat was thin, worn at the sleeves, and her shoes were not meant for this kind of weather. She checked her phone again, panic rising in her chest. Oh, she was late. Not because she didn't care, but because life had once again asked more of her than she had to give. The babysitter had canceled at the last minute. Her son had cried, clinging to her leg, afraid she wouldn't come back. She had promised him she would. She always kept her promises. By the time she finally left him with a neighbor, the city had already begun to close itself for the night. Now she stood there, staring at the restaurant from across the street, heart pounding, shame heavy in her steps. She imagined him already gone. Imagined the empty chair, the quiet judgment, the confirmation of every fear she carried about herself. Inside, the Vampire King glanced at the door again. An hour had passed. The waitress approached softly, her voice gentle. "Would you like anything else, sir?" He met her eyes and gave a small, kind smile. "I'll wait a little longer." Something in his tone made her pause. Not hope, not stubbornness, something steadier, respect. He returned his gaze to the window, watching the snow swirl like memories that never quite disappeared. He remembered centuries ago, standing alone in castles, waiting for people who never came. He remembered deciding long ago that he would never punish lateness without knowing the story behind it. Outside, the woman took a trembling breath and stepped forward. The bell above the door rang. The Vampire King felt it before he saw her. A shift in the room, a quiet ache, familiar and sharp. He lifted his eyes slowly. She stood just inside the doorway, cheeks red from the cold, hair damp with melting snow, eyes wide with apology and fear. She looked around, uncertain, already preparing herself for disappointment. Well, their eyes met. In that instant, something ancient in him stirred. Not hunger, not power. Recognition. He rose from his chair without hesitation, pulling it back gently as if the moment had been waiting for her all along. She froze, unsure, her hands clenched around her bag like armor. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know I'm late, you don't have to." He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. carrying a warmth that surprised even him. "It's Christmas Eve," he said softly. "No one should be rushed tonight." Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't planned to show, and as she took a hesitant step toward the table, the Vampire King felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. This meeting was not an accident, and what he was about to choose next would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. She hesitated before sitting down, as if the chair itself might vanish if she trusted it too quickly. When she finally did, she kept her coat on, fingers still numb, shoulders slightly hunched like someone used to bracing for disappointment. The Vampire King noticed everything. The way her eyes flicked toward the door, counting exits, the careful way she placed her bag at her feet close enough to protect, the apology still lingering on her lips even though he had already forgiven it. "I didn't mean to keep you waiting," she said again, quieter this time. "I almost didn't come." He nodded slowly, not interrupting. He had learned long ago that people reveal more when they are not rushed. "I'm glad you did," he replied. The words were simple, but he meant them more than she could know. The waitress returned, offering menus, but he gently declined for now. "Something warm for her," he said instead. "Whatever she likes." The woman looked up, startled. "You don't know what I like." A faint smile touched his face. "Then we'll find out." Something in her chest loosened at that. It was such a small kindness, yet it felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. She wasn't used to being considered without having to ask. As the waitress left, silence settled between them. Not the awkward kind, but the kind filled with unspoken stories. Outside, snow pressed against the glass, muting the city, giving the night permission to slow down. She took a breath. This was supposed to be normal, she said with a small, almost embarrassed laugh. A blind date, one quiet night where I pretend I'm not always tired. He watched her carefully. "And are you pretending now?" Her laugh faded. She looked down at her hands, roughened from work, from carrying too much for too long. "I don't think I remember how." That honesty reached him deeper than she realized. He had worn many disguises across centuries, played countless roles, but fatigue like hers was something even immortality recognized. "Oh, you don't have to pretend here," he said. "Not tonight." Her eyes lifted again, searching his face, trying to decide whether this was kindness or something that would later ask for a price. She had learned the difference too late, too many times. The waitress returned with two steaming cups of cocoa, the kind topped with whipped cream and a light dusting of chocolate. The warmth curled into the air between them. For a moment, she simply stared at it. "I used to make this for my son," she said softly, "before bed when things were simpler." "I used to?" he asked gently. She nodded. "He's with a neighbor tonight. I almost canceled. He was scared I wouldn't come back." Something dark flickered behind his eyes, ancient and protective. Children had always carried a fragile gravity for him. They reminded him of everything the world too often took too soon. "Oh, you came back," he said. "I always do." She took a small sip, then another, and the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. The warmth spread not just through her hands, but somewhere deeper. "You're very calm," she said suddenly. "Most people would be annoyed by now." "I've waited much longer for far less," he replied, then paused, realizing how that might sound. He softened his tone. "Some things are worth patience." Her gaze lingered on him now, curiosity replacing fear. "Like what?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, the snow thickened, the world narrowing to the glow of the restaurant and the quiet table between them. Finally, he spoke, like people who arrive late because they were busy keeping a promise. Her breath caught. She hadn't told him about the promise, about her son, about the guilt that followed her everywhere. For the first time that night, she truly looked at him. And in that moment, she felt it too, that this man was not just waiting for a date. He was waiting for something broken to trust him. She opened her mouth to speak again, to ask who he really was, but before she could, the lights in the restaurant flickered. Just once. Well, then again. The Vampire King felt it immediately, a disturbance beneath the city's calm surface, something old, something that did not belong to this quiet night. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he reached for his cup, masking the shift inside him. Oh, she noticed the change. What is it? She asked softly. He met her eyes, centuries of restraint hidden behind his steady gaze. Nothing, he said, just the night reminding me who I am. And as the light steadied, he realized with sudden clarity that whatever had followed him into this city had finally found him. And it had noticed her to the lights held steady after that, but the feeling did not fade. It lingered like a low note beneath the music of the room, something only he could hear clearly. The Vampire King kept his posture relaxed, shoulders loose, expression unchanged, yet every sense inside him had sharpened. She watched him over the rim of her cup. You looked far away just now, she said, not accusing, just observant. Old habit, he replied. I learned to listen to rooms before I learned to speak in them. She smiled faintly at that. That explains why this one feels calmer with you in it. The words landed softly, but they struck deep. He had ruled halls filled with fear and obedience. Calm had never been something people associated with him. Hearing it now, spoken so casually, almost undone him. The waitress passed again, asking if they were ready to order. He glanced at her, then back to the woman across from him. Would you like to stay a little longer? He asked. No pressure. We can eat or we can just sit. She hesitated, then nodded. I don't get nights like this often. Neither do I, he thought, but he didn't say it. As menus were placed on the table, he noticed the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for hers. Not from cold anymore, from something else. From the quiet realization that she felt safe here and didn't know how long that safety would last. So, she said after a moment, trying to sound casual, what do you do? He almost laughed. I manage things, he said carefully. People, problems. Well, that sounds exhausting. Well, it can be, he admitted, but I choose it. She looked at him with new interest. Most people don't choose heavy things, they just inherit them. Her insight surprised him. He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if she were a riddle written in a language he had forgotten how to read. And you, he asked, what do you choose? She took a breath, eyes drifting toward the window. I choose my son every day, even when I'm tired, especially then. There it was again, that pull in his chest, that fierce, quiet courage. He had seen warriors kneel before him, kings bargain with their lives, but this kind of strength had always been rarer. Oh, you must love him very much, he said. She smiled, this time fully. He's the reason I still believe tomorrow can be kind. The words hung between them, fragile and bright. Outside, across the street, a man stood beneath the glow of a broken street lamp. To anyone else, he looked like just another passerby, collar turned up against the cold. But the Vampire King felt him like a shadow pressed against his spine. One of his own, an old servant, bound by a loyalty that had long ago twisted into resentment. The Vampire King's fingers tightened around his cup. He had hoped to keep this night untouched by his past. He had hoped, foolishly, that centuries could be outrun. Are you all right? She asked. Yes, he said quickly, too quickly. He forced himself to relax. I just don't like seeing people left out in the cold. As she followed his gaze to the window, me neither. There was a shared understanding in that. Two lives shaped by waiting, by standing on the edge of rooms, hoping someone would notice. The man outside moved closer, his reflection briefly sliding across the glass. The Vampire King shifted his chair just enough to place himself between her and the window, subtle, protective. Oh, she noticed. "Oh, you did that on purpose," she said softly. He met her eyes, knowing there was no point denying it. Sometimes, he said, protecting someone means not explaining everything. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she surprised him by nodding. I understand. That trust, offered so easily, was more dangerous than any blade. The waitress returned with their food, breaking the tension. Laughter rose from another table. A Christmas song played softly overhead. For a moment, the world pretended to be normal again. But the vampire king knew better. The man outside turned and walked away, satisfied for now, not defeated, just waiting. As the vampire king reached for his fork, he felt the weight of a choice pressing down on him. If he stayed close to her, his world would follow. Darkness had a way of recognizing light. He looked at the woman across from him, at the way she smiled as she took her first bite, unaware of how close danger had come. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king felt fear. Not for himself, but for what might happen if he allowed himself to care. The food arrived warm and simple, the kind meant to comfort rather than impress. Steam rose from the plates, and for a while they ate in silence, the good kind, the kind where no one feels the need to fill every space with words. As she relaxed more with each bite, the vampire king noticed how her shoulders lowered, how the tightness around her eyes softened. It reminded him of nights long ago when people believed the world could still be gentle if given the chance. "This is really good," she said quietly. "I almost forgot what it feels like to sit down and eat without watching the clock." He nodded. Time can be cruel when it's always borrowed. She smiled at that, then grew thoughtful. "You speak like someone who's had a lot of it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've had enough to learn what matters." Her gaze lingered on him as if she sensed there was more behind that answer. She didn't press. Instead, she asked something softer. "Do you ever wish you lived differently?" The question reached places he kept locked even from himself. "Yes," he said after a moment, "but only because I didn't know how to be gentle back then." As she set her fork down, "You seem gentle now." The words struck deeper than she intended. Gentleness had been his hardest lesson. Power came easily, restraint did not. Before he could respond, a sudden gust rattled the windows, sharp and insistent. The candles on nearby tables flickered violently. A hush passed through the room. The vampire king felt it again, stronger this time. A pull like a thread tugged too hard. He straightened slowly, eyes darkening, his senses reaching beyond the walls of the restaurant. Somewhere nearby, something old was moving, something curious, something hungry. She noticed his change immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice low. "I need to step outside for a moment," he said. "I'll be right back." Her instinct was to say okay, but something in his tone stopped her. "Is it because of me?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if committing her face to memory. "No," he said firmly, "it's because of me." He stood, pulling on his coat, then hesitated. "Please stay inside," he added. "Finish your meal." She nodded, though unease crept into her chest as he walked toward the door. Outside, the cold struck him immediately, sharp and familiar. The man from earlier stepped out of the shadows, his smile thin, eyes reflecting too much moonlight. "You've grown soft," the man said, "waiting for humans, eating their food." The vampire king's voice was calm, but steel lived beneath it. "You were told to stay away from this city." "And miss seeing you like this," the man replied, protective, distracted. The vampire king moved closer, his presence pressing down like a warning. "Leave tonight." The man's gaze flicked past him toward the window, toward her. "She shines," he murmured. "You know what happens to things that shine near us." Something ancient flared in the vampire king's chest. Not rage, resolve. "You will not touch her," he said quietly. Inside, she watched through the glass, her breath fogging the window. She couldn't hear them, but she could see the tension in the vampire king's stance, the way his body placed itself between danger and the door. A memory stirred in her. Too many men had walked away from her problems. Too many had left her to handle fear alone. Oh, this one was different. Outside, the man laughed softly. Careful, he said, you're forgetting what you are. No, the Vampire King replied, I'm remembering. A long moment passed. Snow fell thicker, muffling the street. Finally, the man stepped back, his expression unreadable. This isn't over. Well, he disappeared into the night. The Vampire King stood there for a moment longer, breathing in the cold, steadying himself. He had crossed an invisible line. When he returned inside, she was standing by the table, coat already on. I was afraid you wouldn't come back, she said, not accusing, just honest. He met her gaze, the weight of centuries pressing against the simplicity of her fear. I always come back, he said. But as their eyes held, he realized something that unsettled him far more than the threat outside. If he stayed in her life, danger would follow. And if he walked away now, he would become just another man who left her standing alone on Christmas Eve. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the restaurant flowing around them as if they were in a different room altogether. Laughter, clinking plates, soft music. None of it quite reached them. I didn't mean to make things awkward, she said finally, fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. If something came up, I understand, I can go. The words were familiar, too familiar. He heard in them the echo of every time she had been asked to make herself smaller so others could be comfortable. No, he said at once. His voice was gentle, but there was no uncertainty in it. Please stay. She searched his face, looking for doubt. Finding none unsettled her more than if he had hesitated. They sat again, slower this time. The air between them felt charged, not with danger, but with truth pressing closer to the surface. I don't scare easily, she said after a moment. Life already taught me how to live with fear. He nodded. Fear is not the problem, being alone with it is. Her eyes softened. You sound like someone who's been alone a long time. I have, he said. He didn't add how long. Silence settled, heavier than before, but not uncomfortable. He watched her carefully now, weighing something invisible, something that could not be undone once spoken. I should tell you something, he said at last. Her pulse quickened. Okay. There are parts of my life that don't fit neatly into normal conversations, he continued. And being close to me, it isn't always safe. She let out a quiet breath. I figured you weren't just a guy who manages spreadsheets. A corner of his mouth lifted despite himself. Then his expression grew serious again. I mean it. I don't want to lie to you, and I don't want you hurt because of me. She studied him, really studied him, as if she were seeing past the calm exterior to the burden beneath. You know, she said slowly, most danger in my life came from people who promised safety without honesty. The words landed like a verdict. I don't need perfect, she went on. I need real, and I need to know if someone would choose to stand beside me when it's hard. His chest tightened. Choice, that was the word that haunted him. Across the room, a child laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. It carried him back through centuries to nights when he had stood at the edges of villages, unseen, choosing whether to intervene or remain legend. He looked at her again. If I stay, he said quietly, I would protect you, not because I owe you, because I choose to. Her eyes filled, though she tried to hide it. No one said that to me in a long time. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed sharply on the table. The sudden sound made her flinch. As she looked at the screen, color draining from her face. It's my neighbor, she whispered. Something's wrong. The Vampire King stood instantly, every sense alert. What happened? She swallowed hard. She says my son woke up screaming. He won't calm down. He keeps saying someone is outside. The room seemed to tilt. Outside, the word echoed too closely to what he already knew. I need to go, she said, panic breaking through her careful calm. I shouldn't have left him. He reached for his coat. You won't go alone. She looked at him, startled. You don't have to. I know, he said, but I'm choosing to. As they hurried toward the door, the Christmas music swelled behind them, painfully cheerful. Snow rushed at them as soon as they stepped outside, the city darker now, quieter. Halfway down the street, the Vampire King stopped suddenly. Oh, he felt it again. Closer, too close. His gaze lifted toward the rooftops, his jaw tightening. Whatever had been watching him earlier had not gone far. And now it knew exactly where she was going. The street was almost empty, snow thick enough now to soften every sound. Streetlights glowed like tired stars, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the hour. Too late, too quiet. The Vampire King slowed his steps without meaning to, his senses reaching outward, brushing against the night. He could feel the fear moving ahead of them, thin but sharp, like a wire pulled too tight. She noticed his hesitation. "What is it?" she asked, her voice unsteady now, the strength she carried finally cracking under the weight of her worry. "We're not being followed," he said carefully, "but we are not alone." Her grip tightened on her phone. "My son." "I know," he said, "and I promise you this, nothing will happen to him." They reached her building, an old place with narrow stairs and flickering hallway lights. The neighbor stood at the door, pale and shaken, relief flooding her face when she saw them. "He just wouldn't stop crying," the woman said, kept pointing at the window. The Vampire King didn't wait for more. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small apartment with a quiet steadiness. The air was wrong, not violent, just disturbed like a room after an argument. The boy sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide and shining with tears. When he saw his mother, he ran to her, burying his face in her coat. "There was a man," the boy whispered. "He was watching." The Vampire King knelt slowly so he was level with the child, careful not to frighten him. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "You told someone you trusted." The boy looked at him, studying his face with a seriousness far beyond his years. "You're not scared," he said. "No," the Vampire King replied, "because you're not alone." Something shifted then, not outside, inside the room. The fear loosened as if it had been waiting for permission to leave. The Vampire King rose and moved to the window. Snow coated the sill untouched. Whatever had come had already gone, testing, probing, and now retreating. "It's over," he said quietly. She held her son close, tears sliding freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is too much. I shouldn't have dragged you into my life." He turned back to her, his expression soft but resolute. "You didn't drag me. You invited me. There's a difference." The neighbor slipped out, giving them privacy. The room settled into silence, broken only by the boy's slow, calming breaths. She looked at the Vampire King then, really looked at him, and finally asked the question she had been holding all night. "Who are you?" He hesitated, then chose honesty. "Not all of it, just enough." "I've lived a long time," he said. "Long enough to learn that power means nothing if it isn't used to protect." She waited, sensing there was more, but not demanding it. "And tonight," he continued, "I was reminded why I stayed in this world at all." Her son shifted, peeking at him from over her shoulder. "Are you going to leave?" the boy asked. Well, the question cut deeper than any threat. The Vampire King looked at the child, then at the woman who had carried so much alone and made a choice that echoed louder than centuries of survival. "No," he said softly, "not tonight." Christmas morning crept in slowly. Pale light touched the windows, gentle and forgiving. The city woke as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The Vampire King stood by the door, coat in hand, ready to go when the sun rose higher. That was the rule, it always had been. She walked him to the door, her son still half asleep in her arms. "Thank you," she said, "for waiting, for coming back, for choosing us even for one night." He met her gaze, something like hope warming his ancient heart. "This doesn't have to be just one night." She didn't answer right away. She only smiled, small but real. As he stepped into the morning snow, the Vampire King felt something unfamiliar settle inside him. Not hunger, not duty. Belonging. And somewhere deep in the city, The darkness that had watched him understood something new. The vampire king was no longer alone, and neither was she.